Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another week in This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm here, Hyun Park, along with Charlie Araujo. How are you today, Charlie?
I am great. It has been beautiful weather. I'm a little exhausted. It's 4 o'clock as we're recording this my time. It has been back-to-back meetings since 6:30 this morning, basically. So it's like, but it was rivalry weekend if you're a baseball fan, and if you've been kind of following along, I have two teams. My kind of original home team, the Angels, from when I was in California, born and raised, and they swept the Dodgers. So that left me in a very good
That's
mood.
great news.
It was great news, especially
Yes.
you're a Giants fan, right? So,
Well, in the Bay Area, yeah, it's easy to hate the Dodgers. So great job.
so that's right, the enemy of my enemy. So, and then of course I adopted the Mets a few years back, and they dropped 2 out of 3 to the Yankees, unfortunately. Boo. But it was still a good weekend of baseball. So that was always exciting. And speaking of rivalries, it was data week, I guess. Announcements coming out of Alteryx, Qlik, Informatica, and Boomi, and you were at least at one of those. And of course, this is a space you cover. And no surprise to anybody who follows the space, listens to our show at all. What do you think the big topic was for the all four of them? What did they all pound relentlessly?
Big data. Mobile, mobile cloud.
Oh, I'm sorry. That what from 10 years ago, maybe? No, it was all agentic AI all the time. So anyway, why don't you walk us through sort of what I mean, I think you and I maybe have slightly different takes on some of this, but I think all clearly talking about agentic AI and all very similar, but also a couple of different approaches and some different varying levels of boldness. And I think that it's sort of a good indication of just, I think, the overall industry of what we're seeing play out right now, of everyone's trying to find their path when it comes to AI and agentic AI specifically. So give us the read.
Yeah, I'm just going to go in alphabetical order because there's not really a great rhyme or reason to pick one over the other. Everybody's trying to do basically the same thing from a data integration starting point. So let's start with Alteryx. Alteryx launched its AI Control Center, which, from a practical perspective, looks at the security and governance around AI interactions and LLMs, and they're trying to bring together their various capabilities, including SQL, including their workflows, including their live queries and real-time data access. Obviously, Alteryx wants to be this window to data use across the board with across LLMs, queries, workflows. They've obviously already been great at queries and workflows traditionally, and now they want to uh, grab the agents and AI side as well.
So, well, first of all, the big news. Have I been saying their name wrong for like a decade? I say Alteryx. Is it Alteryx? Is that how
I'll,
you say it?
I've heard both, including from Dean Stalker, their founder. Alter is uh, it's Alter YX because they have this geospatial background. I've heard both Alteryx and Alteryx. I guess it depends on the
Okay.
day.
Okay. Well, good to know at least. I wasn't completely blowing it. We don't have time today, but I have a story about misnaming somebody, a person, and how it can go really badly. So anyway, okay. So I think you were a little underwhelmed by this announcement. And I'm not going to say there was anything groundbreaking, but I think that's sort of, I've been a fan of Alteryx ability. Like, I just feel like they're one of these organizations that is really good at having focus, about sticking to their knitting, and about executing. And I feel like they've done a really good job of that over the years. And I think this is an example. So this is clearly not the flashiest AI. I think you're probably fair in your assessment that they're not horribly agentic in what they're doing. But I do think what they are doing is taking a very pragmatic, practical approach to how to apply AI to deliver against their use cases, the things that they do well. And I think that's a smart thing. I think that it's really easy to get swept up, and I think in certain cases, depending on where you're at, maybe within your organization as far as in its own trajectory, taking bolder swipes and using a new technology like AI to perhaps change course and set a new path can make sense. But when you have a clear mission and focus, sometimes it is the smarter move not to go and chase the hype and to sort of hit those ground balls, to keep on the baseball analogy, right? Just hit those base hits and to keep consistently playing little ball. And that's sort of how I see this. So I actually viewed it as positive. I saw it as being right down the pipe in terms of what their customers would expect AI in a very pragmatic standpoint. So I guess we'll see how the market responds to it.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing for me is I think it was good that Alteryx took on the data integration from an more automated perspective and is managing LLMs to a greater extent to support the governance associated with integrating LLMs into any sort of workflow. Obviously, you want to do that. Those are important. I actually talked about that in a recent video I did on the future careers of the data analyst, where I definitely talked about data integration and data management. But what I felt was missing was a better understanding of how to manage agents and how to orchestrate agents. I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. And especially for Alteryx, which has been well known for automating data workflows, I think companies will look to Alteryx specifically to manage agents over time, because it is going to be parallel to what they've done in the past. And they didn't really announce much there from either a aspirational perspective or from a functional perspective.
So I think that actually begs a big question, and it's a good segue into the Boomi announcement, right? So Boomi of these four, I think, took the biggest, boldest swing.
Yes.
And I think Boomi is in an interesting spot at a macro level, right? So they're just a few years removed from their, I guess it was a spinoff out of Dell, and sort of got their independence back. And I think it's been interesting. Ever since then, I feel like they sort of have been in this resurgent state. I feel like they've really stagnated. That the acquisition, I don't believe, was a good fit, and did a good was a good move for them. And once they spun back out, I feel like they've been innovating again and doing some interesting things. And so for them, maybe this makes a lot of sense. But it does. So they're trying to move much more into this idea of agent orchestration and agent management. And it begs the question. So you just mentioned that people are going to look at Alteryx or look to data companies for this. And I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure are the data players going to be the natural home for agent management? I think it's an interesting open question. Clearly, ServiceNow is making a play there. Arguably, Salesforce is making a play there. There are some independent players out there that are making a play there. And so it does sort of beg the question, is this going to be an independent domain, a whole separate space? Is it going to be the workflow-ish more players like ServiceNow, Salesforce? Or is it going to be the data players like a Boomi? And so Boomi is clearly throwing their hat in the ring here. So, I mean, maybe you want to tee up exactly what they announced, and then kind of what's your take on, do you think that this is the right move for them?
Yes. So Boomi announced its Boomi AgentStudio, which was formerly called their AI studio. But Boomi has been very aggressive about trying to figure out the entire lifecycle management of the agent, from agent creation and tools to create those agents, to the governance, to the ongoing operational support associated with those agents, and then being able to handle the models, the APIs, and the data associated with the agents. Just so a full lifecycle approach. I think it makes a lot of sense what their vision is. And frankly, it's what everybody's vision should be. Boomi has taken steps in this direction in the past with their acquisitions of Rivery and the Mashery assets to support APIs. And of course, Boomi was already an application integration platform. So no issues there from a broad-based data integration perspective. And then Boomi also announced a number of agents to help with data and agents, such as API design, an integration advisor to support integration efficiency, also an API documentation agent, because everybody hates documenting their work, honestly. And then a data connector agent to help support connectors with any REST-based data source, because honestly, that is a lot of picking and choosing and mapping that is honestly pretty good work for AI to do. And then, of course, Boomi also mentioned that they are supporting model context protocol, which we have been talking about a lot over the past few weeks.
Yeah, I mean the MCP thing, it's like whatever, okay, that's great. But the other four, I mean, I like their choice of four. We're gonna talk about Informatica here in a second. And if I compare these two, I mean, I think that they're hitting on the right. These are much more likely to be very actionable to actually provide value in the short term. These are the sort of the low-hanging fruit sort of elements. Where I get stuck a little bit is, and look, I don't know which way this goes, right? If we think about agentic AI at its broadest level, it is in fact, as we've talked about, the fundamental construct is data and workflows with this layer of intelligence that allows you to leverage those two to take action. So ostensibly, I guess it does sort of make sense that it's either going to be a data player or a workflow player that is the logical home. Although you can make a case that the observability layer is, makes just as much sense, right? The tools that are designed to look at environments and look at systems and watch things as they flow through. And then, of course, we haven't talked, and I'm way behind, so I probably would have raised this one up. But Celonis made some news this week, also introducing some new advancements. Sort of they're throwing their hat in the ring. Again, sort of a middle space between a traditional workflow player and an observability player, saying, hey, if you're looking at this from a process management standpoint, is that the logical place? I think it's going to be a really interesting question. I think if you're a CIO, it's two things. A, you're going to have to figure out how to manage and govern these agents, and secondly, I think it's anyone's guess is the best way to actually do that. As an organization that is delivering into market an agentic AI platform, I don't know how any of these solutions would manage our environment or any of our solutions. I mean, it's not very clear right now how any of this actually works in practice. So I think it is quite interesting to see Boomi take this approach. I think they're clearly differentiated in that they're definitely taking a much bolder stance into the market. So I guess we'll have to see if that bodes well for them or not. I think perhaps the most interesting thing is that none of the others do seem to be going there, at least in this crop of announcements.
Yes, and I'll just add that Boomi's CEO, Steve Lucas, is obviously one of the most charismatic CEOs in the tech space. I think he's a fantastic speaker, fantastic at selling the vision. And of course, he would, if he were here right now, he would probably say, of course, where you can integrate with Symphony AI, we'll use REST-based APIs and open standards, and we can figure out how to talk to your agent, and we're happy for their agents talk to our agents, and it's all going to be one big happy family. I'm sure that's what Boomi wants to say, and I think the devil's going to be in the details now that they are saying that they are general availability on all of this, which is also a differentiation from a lot of what we're going to see and talk about the rest of today.
Yeah. All right. So what was your take on Informatica?
Yeah. So my bias here, I was at Informatica World. My travel was paid for. So kind of the typical analyst deal. I've worked with Informatica in the past. Actually, I've worked with all four of these companies in the past. So that's, I guess I'm equally biased. But from the Informatica perspective, I thought it was a very workmanlike announcement. There was an AI engineering service that was announced with the express purpose of managing multi-agent systems. So really focusing on how these agents are going to talk to each other, not necessarily the best solution for creating agents from scratch, although there is going to be, this is much more focused on discovering agents and then being able to have them connect to each other. And there's going to be probably some code writing capabilities, because that's kind of Informatica's bread and butter, right? Connecting things together and then having the interstitial code and queries to make sure that things work. And then Informatica announced a number of agents that are both in preview and then in process. So the ones that are most closest to market are around data quality, data discovery, data lineage. And then there's a bunch of other products that I'm pretty sure will come out by the end of the year, but including an ELT agent, extract, load, transfer, improving your master data management, taxonomies and hierarchies, so serving as a modernization solution to go from the on-prem to a cloud environment. There are going to be agents to help with those things as well. But you notice as I'm saying all this stuff, this is nuts and bolts data stuff. They are not going to say that they're going to do more than that. They are sticking to their core area.
And I think that makes sense. I mean, I think the challenge with a company like Informatica is they've got this very broad, diverse customer base, and they have a whole lot of needs they have to cater to. And so they're trying to cover their bases, and I think as a result, they're kind of sticking close to the knitting, which I don't think is a bad thing in general. And to your point, I think it's the devil's going to be in the details. It is interesting that these are, for the most part, not even going to be available in preview until the fall. So this is still very much a work in progress thing. So this was, to me, probably it was difficult to get overly excited about it. I do think it speaks, and we're going to talk about this with Qlik here in just a second, because I think they're sort of in the same boat. What I think is interesting is it's fascinating to me that we are already at a stage where agentic AI, at least from a market perspective, is already becoming sort of a table stakes sort of thing, where and I think this announcement is a classic example. I don't know that any of this is going to differentiate them in the market. Any of this is really going to set them apart. But if they aren't doing any of this stuff, then they're falling behind.
Right.
And I think it's an interesting situation to be here already.
Yeah, one of the things we're talking about at Informatica is how we thought that having, we're talking, product people, analyst people, and we kind of had agreed that there's going to have to be some consideration of agentic augmentation of your master data management. Like that is going to have to be something you have to write into your RFPs going forward on your plans to be able to support that over the next year, because it's just easier to handle that metadata through an automated process. There's just going to be a lot more that is captured that you're humanly not going to capture on a human basis.
The one thing I do think is interesting, and this I'm not picking on Informatica, because to a certain extent they're taking the broadest swipe at all of this, but none of the players really are doing a whole lot. And this I'm asking specifically about Informatica because you were there, because perhaps it's not coming through in the press release, but none of them are really talking about. I mean, about the challenges with the veracity of the agents. Right. So with a lot of use cases, you have the human in the loop and you have the sort of interaction layer where, you're sort of less concerned. But with all of these solutions, this is very much in the weeds with the data stuff that often happens, and what triggered this for me is you're talking about master data management, right? This is something that happens often way outside the purview of the users, right? The actual consumers of that data. And so it is really easy to see a scenario in which an agent goes rogue and does a bunch of weird things, and suddenly you've got a bunch of data corruption or data issues. And I'm curious, I'm not hearing a whole lot. I mean, obviously, as a data quality agent, but I'm curious about how we're managing the quality and the veracity of the agents themselves. Did you hear any of that kind of talk about how they were addressing those concerns?
So I think the closest is from Boomi, which is talking about the design of trusted agents. But yes, I agree that I'm not hearing very much about what I would consider to be agent testing, some sort of iterative, probably multi-thousand round test of agents to make sure that you are getting well-governed and accurate and actionable topics and actions that come out of the agent. I am not seeing great testing processes or even goals aspirationally on what you would want to be doing with those models. And I think that's this is a real problem, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. I hear a little bit from, say, Salesforce and ServiceNow, or at least giving lip service to the need to test, but even there, I don't see great tools for actually handling the testing at this point. And I think it is a real weakness because we all know that application testing, unit testing are things that you have to do for any sort of services that you put into production. This is not new by any means. Simply because we're calling this an agent does not change the basic
Yeah.
rules of enterprise software and applications.
And the challenges that come with it. And I think the challenge, of course, when we're talking about the data landscape is that it is a big, giant, messy area. And this is where agents have a tremendous amount of promise. In fact, I would probably argue second to coding, this is the space, if we can nail it, that there's, a ton of untapped potential benefit here because it's such a hairy issue. I mean, um,
Mhm.
but the stakes are extremely high about getting it right. And I do feel like I think the big difference to me, if I look at compare it to coding, is with coding, even if I'm using quote unquote an autonomous agent, generally I have a coder who is a very intelligent set of hands and eyes that is
Mhm.
participating in this development cycle. And I think with data, you may not always have that, and that's where the risk of something going off the rails increases. But yeah, I guess we'll see. So sort of last but not least was Qlik. I mean, what was your take on what they announced?
Yeah, I thought Clicks was actually quite interesting because partially because Click has been trying to really broaden their portfolio. They are private equity owned at this point, and they are they are bringing in all of the pieces as quickly as they can. Really, they've been spending a lot of money. I give them a lot of credit for trying to build a comprehensive data and analytics solution. And they've been launching their data discovery agent, forecasting, data prep. Again, kind of like Alteryx, trying to talk about how they are consolidating all their capabilities into a single Qlik cloud analytics solution, but also adding their auto ML capability, their application automation capabilities, and making a holistic solution that goes across the board.
So the one thing they announced, which I want to make sure I'm understanding, and I'm curious your take, is what they're calling a write table, which apparently is a new feature, if I'm reading this right, that is basically allowing data analysts to annotate data directly within the analytics platform itself. Um, and then I didn't. It's talking about governed write back, but I'm not clear if that means the annotated elements. But in either case, I thought that was interesting because this has always
Mhm.
been one of the bugaboos when it comes to data analytics, and when you have, I mean, this is sort of in the weed stuff. But what was your take on that one?
Yeah, I think it's always been difficult to contextualize data because you have to then put that contextualized data usually in another table and figure out how that's linked and make sure it doesn't get orphaned over time. So this is not that complicated, to be honest, but it is a capability that is often ignored, and then metadata gets lost in a more generalized catalog or in an unattached data source that doesn't necessarily get migrated or kept up in a standard way. So I that's all I took out of it. It's not super technical, to be honest, but it is a necessary piece of the puzzle if you don't want to lose context going forward. And obviously, for an AI perspective, that's really important. If you want to use your data to further train or tune a model going forward, or build your own custom model over time, which we are more likely do in the next few years once we are more comfortable with AI.
Yeah, well, and that is why I'm interested in it, because I do think we're at this stage right now where organizations that are getting their data house in order and are annotating their data, contextualizing it independently, are going to set themselves up for a more positive leveraging of AI, because that's going to be the missing gap, right? I mean,
Mhm.
absent that, then we're relying on AI to sort of intuit those relationships on its own, which is going to sometimes work and sometimes not work as well. And so the more you can enable an organization to annotate that data as part of the existing flow today, I think that actually is a good thing. So that's why I sort of tuned into it. And then the last little part that we should point out is there is some rebranding going on with Qlik. very minor. One, they renaming Qlik Auto ML now is called Qlik Predict, and Qlik automation application automation. They dropped the application part, and it is now just Qlik Automate. And pointing out for two reasons. One, we're going to talk about rebranding here in a couple of minutes as we close out the show. But secondly, it just proves how flippin' difficult it is to name anything right now when the markets are moving so fast. Because Auto ML, which I presume stood for machine learning, probably made a ton of sense just 2 years ago, and today it's
Sure.
like not so much. So anyhow, all right, moving on. So Salesforce made another acquisition. They've been on they and both ServiceNow have been on a tear recently, and this time to acquire a company called Convergence.AI. And I have an opinion about this and what it sort of signals on both levels, but I'm curious, we'll start with your take. I mean, good move, bad move, necessary, shrug? I mean, what was your take on this?
I thought it was a useful little acquisition in that, the Convergence AI, they are great at creating these complex, more complex agentic capabilities, or imitating judgment tasks that require some sort of judgment thought process. And I think Salesforce really needs that type of capability in their for their enterprise clients, because they are trying to imitate human judgment in more and more areas, not from a holistic perspective, but in very specific slices associated with sales, marketing, service, the customer needs. But they don't have to recreate the human brain. They just have to create a very specific type of human judgment for each task that they are going to end up selling out to the world. So I think it's useful. I'm honestly not sure if this was necessary, because Salesforce has a ton of smart people in-house to do AI, quite frankly. But if it's easier to buy than build, then yeah, Salesforce has plenty of money, so why not?
So, well, that actually brings up the point I'm going to make, but I'll start with this. I think there's two big takeaways from this. For me, the first is that I think we're in this very interesting state, not just ServiceNow and Salesforce, there's others, but we're seeing a whole lot of acquisitions of these smaller AI companies recently. And what I think is interesting is every last one of these, and I'm thinking specifically like this acquisition, the MoveWorks acquisition, a few others, these almost universally are organizations that approach the market in this holistic fashion, where one of their claim to fame was, we can service across these different ecosystems and we're not tied to any one platform. And then what happens is one of these big platforms buys them. And now suddenly they may still try to make the claim, but we all know it's not really true at that point, right? It's like once you're part of that ecosystem, that's going to be the primary focus. And so what's happening is you're taking the agnostic players in this space and are started taking them off the table. So that it's either going to go one of two ways. Either that's going to be bad for the market in that we're not going to have that sort of universal playing field or player that helps unite everything, or it's going to be a signal that what we're seeing is this convergence, no pun intended, around, people are picking their platform. Oh, okay, we're a Salesforce shop, and therefore that's where we hunt everything, or we're wherever else. And I'm not sure which it is. I'm not sure if this is good or bad from that regard. I tend to be skeptical. I mean, I'm torn, right? If I put my CIO hat on again today. I think investing in a major platform has a degree of simplicity and security, where it's like I don't have to worry about some of the moving parts. I can trust in them, or at least go yell at them if make them work, and I can focus my energies elsewhere. But I'm also sort of naturally skeptical, and maybe it's because I'm old enough to have lived through all the Oracle and SAP and all those generations where it's like it doesn't sort of end well for you as the buyer in the end, because you end up just being, basically locked in with this company. So that was one sort of takeaway, and that is just like I'm curious which way this one's going to land. The other thing I think is interesting, and I look at the ServiceNow's acquisitions recently as part of this too. It lays bare a little bit the separation between the marketing hype and the reality underneath the covers to your point, why did they make this acquisition?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't believe they were buying market share. I don't believe they were, eliminating competition, right?
I
I
think the
think,
company is a year old.
right. They clearly needed this technology in some way. And
Hmm.
yet, if you were to hear Benioff talk from stage, they have the most advanced technology and are changing the world, da 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 da, right? If you heard ServiceNow talking just weeks before their announcement of the MoveWorks acquisition, you would have been 100% sure that they needed absolutely nothing, and then they go spend billions of dollars to acquire MoveWorks. And both of these are signals of the fact that this is actually a lot harder than it seems based on all the
Hmm.
marketing hype, and therefore you end up seeing these acquisitions because they're trying to close the gaps and actually execute on it, and it's hard to do. And so I think it's to me these are sort of signaling about exactly how much ground there is to cover underneath. And when companies like this are making these huge, and this goes all the way back to Boomi, right? These huge sweeping statements of, oh, we're going to do all of this,
Hmm.
the ability to execute on that is actually quite challenging.
Yeah, one of the interesting notes at the Informatica World show was this comment made while their CEO Amit Walia was on stage, saying that the English is the use of English is actually a very important piece of the agentic experience. And I think of, frankly, how little people, a lot of people know about the English language. Here I've got the elements of style, literally, like as a reminder to me of how to write. But, we've, liberal arts have not been super hot in the 21st century, but there's all sorts of aspects to English across grammar, vocabulary, etymology, semantics, semiotics, all philosophy, like all these higher level structures that exist basically in trying to just cut up words and language in all sorts of ways. And frankly, the people who are making AI often are not well educated in what English actually is as a series of higher level structures. And I think we're going to have to somehow bring that into the computing realm. We might not call it semiotics or whatever, but they're going to create some computer language based version of this metadata layer that is constructed to understand what is happening at that level based on words.
Well, I mean, and I'm no expert, but I mean that's part of what convergence does, right? I mean that's part of what
Right.
they're
It's
doing
part of what
is
they did.
helping.
Yeah, that was smart. Mhm.
Yeah, to add that layer, because I mean right now, right, the LLM approach has basically been, well, the way to decipher all that context is to dump all of this into the system, let the model train off of it, and that's why we quote unquote guess the best word or
Mhm.
idea is simply looking at those constructs and effectively inferring them from that without, you don't have to understand the rules. You can just say, well, I don't know why, but I before E after C, right, or whatever that the
Yep.
thing is, right? And it's like it doesn't understand the rationale behind it. And I think we are seeing that next. We're running against the limits of that. So the next evolution is, well, now how do you start adding layers where there is an actual understanding of the why behind it that complicates it? But it's not where I thought you were going to go, because what I think is interesting around this is that the multilingual aspect of this is actually also, I think, starting to become more of a barrier and
Mhm.
a challenge, because you are correct. Almost everything we talk about right now is an English first approach. And I mean, again, with what we're doing, same thing. And it's just because it gives you the largest market. It's the fastest way of doing this. And once you start dealing with multilingual, it significantly complicates things. So we'll see. I think it's, and I bring this up not to slam Salesforce or ServiceNow or anybody else, but just as a reminder that despite all the marketing hype, this stuff is difficult. It will remain difficult. It's really hard to do. It's really hard to execute on, and that's why you see these sorts of acquisitions, and you just have to sort of keep it all in mind and balance it out. But that isn't to say
Mhm.
it's all hype. One of the things we love about AI is that it is one of these rare circumstances where, on the one hand, we have all this crazy hype that isn't anything we can possibly live up to in the short term. And yet it is balanced against some very pragmatic realities of how much impact AI is in fact really having.
Mm-hmm.
And our last conversation of the day is actually one of those. So Stack Overflow, which even if you're not that technical, you probably run into them. It's a huge site that sits out there with where developers go and post questions. And it's really about community and other developers chiming up with their answers. Well, becoming a bit of a victim to AI in that their numbers over the last whatever it was year, I guess, have fallen
Mm-hmm.
64%, fallen 90% over the last 5 years. And it is really hard to attribute this to anything other than the rise of generative AI and the fact that you now have coding assistants, and I don't need to go ask anybody. I can simply ask my Agentic Copilot or whatever to go figure it out for me. And
Right.
of course, so their response, unsurprisingly, maybe is to rebrand.
Rebrand. Mm-hmm.
So,
Because
what is your take?
that one, just got me to say, "Rrr?" Like, what the heck is going on here? Because the problem they have is obviously not really a branding issue. If anything, I think Stack Overflow is a great brand. If you ask the developer community right now what is Stack Overflow, they at least know it's where I used to go to get answers to coding questions before I started asking ChatGPT, because frankly 90% of what I'm asking is just standard stuff that can be learned in a system. But that said, I think that the problem with Stack Overflow, to the extent that it exists, it's not that people aren't posting repetitive questions anymore, but rather they have a challenge of whether they're going to be able to pull in enough people over time to keep refreshing their data as new languages show up, new technical problems show up. Even right now with models, we're going to have a bunch of technical problems where people are not going to know how to test their models or tune their models or be able to benchmark their models to their actual business accurately, because all we have are these standard task-based benchmarks that aren't really well suited to any particular business. And they're not going to, and if they don't use Stack Overflow and don't know how to get to Stack Overflow over time, I see that as a bigger problem.
Yeah, no, I do think it's going to be. I mean, I read this and I had a few reactions. The first was yours, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how can you focus on rebranding? On the other hand, in fairness to them, they're pivoting or trying to pivot, and it's less really about branding and as in the way we think. This isn't about a new logo and new name, although I think those are probably part of it. It's really about extending this and trying to turn it into more of a community and more of a career oriented
Mhm.
environment where it's because they are rightfully reading the tea leaves, and that there is virtually no way to stop the march towards using LLMs and generative AI to answer those sort of questions, and increasingly obviating the need altogether. If I'm using an agentic coding system that's actually writing the code for me and troubleshooting it on its own, well, I'm not going to have a question to go post into Stack Overflow. So I think they're correctly assessing that this is not a battle they can win. And I think it's certainly a siren call. And we've seen a few of these where companies have announced major fall in traffic and therefore revenue. And if you made your business on being a place where it was purely sort of this captive knowledge, um,
Mhm.
and I think here's the deal: if it was transactional knowledge, i.e., I have a question, I'm looking for an answer, and that is what Stack Overflow is. I think that you're going to have a very difficult time because LLMs excel at that, right? And they're much more dynamic. They can resolve it much more quickly than going and doing a search on Stack Overflow, which I've used tremendously throughout the years, right? So, but what happens? You do a search and you sort through all these answers. You click on, oh, no, that's not what I was talking about. You click on that one, no, that's not what I was talking about. Oh, that one, oh, but that's not the right environment. And it ends up being this, yeah, you get an answer and it's a whole lot faster than troubleshooting it myself, but it's still not exactly a speedy thing. Whereas I can now go into an LLM and it can instantly give me the right answer because it has all this context. You're not
Right.
going to compete with that. And this is where I think their rebranding is wrong, but the idea is right. if you compare that to like Reddit is also, it's a very similar sort of thing. The difference is that Redditors, I think that's what they, do I call myself a we now? It's much more about community and engagement. It's not just a transactional, it's like, I want an opinion, I want insight. And that's something that LLMs are not nearly as good at. And more than anything, as humans, that's not something we really trust in. And here's what I think is fascinating is I will often go to my LM. I actually use different models, but whatever. So right now I'm mostly using Claude. And I will ask Claude about whatever I'm looking for. And I specifically tell it I want user reviews or user insight. And what do I get almost inevitably? Links to Reddit, right? So it summarizes, and then I'm clicking through and I'm clicking into Reddit where I can now read what people are actually typing and saying. And I think this leads into one other little related element, and that is that I think if you are in the business of selling anything e-commerce, if you are providing environments where community comes together, you need to be thinking about how LLMs are going to interact with your data, because that's going to be one of the primary ways that it gets surfaced now. And I think it changes the dynamic significantly. So I think this is a great, it was a great find from an article standpoint, because it really sort of tees up the shift that we're seeing happen in real time.
Yeah, and to me, just as a kind of a site itself, I feel like Stack Overflow as a pure factual Q&A site, the time has passed for that kind of site as a standalone. I would love to see it. I understand there are business issues why this isn't going to happen, but I would love to see it merge with something like an Ars Technica or the Linux Foundation or some sort of group that really loves technology and is large enough to help provide a core of discussion of stable discussion, right? So, but unfortunately, on both sides there, like I think both Ars Technica and Stack Overflow are owned by billion-dollar media companies that each have their own selfish interests.
Yeah, I don't expect we're going to see that, but I do think it's interesting. I mean, I think we're going to see this go one of a couple of ways, I think, right? I mean, you've been talking about all the different events you go to, and what is interesting about all of them, and I know you're an analyst right now, and so that's sort of your job is to go to events hosted by companies, but there's this sort of parallel thing in that it is getting increasingly difficult to find agnostic events and freestanding communities that are not driven by vendors. And I think either AI is going to just be the final nail in the coffin, and it's like we've moved past the era of that kind of community, or it could have the opposite effect, right? Where because we spend so much time interacting with a non-human now, that we actually are driven to want to have that sense of relationship and community, and end up seeing a resurgence in it in some way. I don't know, but this again I think goes back to the difference. There are times I want an answer, and there's times I want opinion and insight, and I think that it's going to be really important to have that segregated as we start thinking about what these new models of interaction look like in an AI driven future.
Yeah, and I also think it's difficult because we could spend the next half hour or hour talking about this, which we're not going to. But this challenge that we simply are used to getting everything for free. It means that everything from media to community, all these things that we used to pay dues for or a subscription fee for, now we expect to get all of that for free. So how do you compete against that if if you are not a commercial entity that is also trying to sell something to that community?
Yeah, I do think it's going to be a continuing challenge. It's been a challenge for a long time, and I think all the rise of AI is actually making it even more challenging. And I don't know that there's any real answers emerging. So I guess we will see. But I do think we can agree on this, that the answer is probably not to rebrand when you get yourself into a situation like this or
No,
find yourself.
I don't think that's going to help. I think we are going towards Skynet or towards the Matrix, you know, one of the two, but you know, rebranding Stack Overflow is not going to change that.
All right.
And on that happy note, you've seen another week of This Week in Enterprise Tech. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe, follow one of the links that is going to show up at the end of this video, and check out some more of our work. Thanks a lot. Take care.